Inside a bus, students chatted excitedly about entering senior high school. To capture the moment, one of them began doing an interview, since it was a rare chance to share long-kept thoughts. A boy named Danny then stood up and declared he wanted to be skinny, while another student announced he would defeat everyone and stand at the top. More students began sharing their ambitions, while another student heard his phone ring. When the student named Ryan answered, he heard his mother say there was no need to act rashly. While he reassured his mother not to worry, the student named Tony proclaimed he would be king of idols. But some students inside mock him and tell him to stop dreaming. Meanwhile, the driver felt irritated but sensed something was wrong. As the road was empty, he also felt as though it stretched endlessly with no visible end. At that moment, the short-haired girl doing the interview grew frustrated because Sheena had not spoken. Sheena, on the other hand, was seated near Ryan and was quietly watching him. The interviewer then reminded everyone this might be their only chance to speak their hearts. Hearing those words, Sheena's expression turned resolute. She stood up and walked to Ryan, who was listening to his mother say he was her only family. While his mother says that nothing must happen to him, his attention shifts to Sheena. Summoning her courage, she finally confessed that she liked him. Her sudden declaration stunned the entire bus into silence. After a moment, the students erupted with excitement and urged Ryan to accept her confession. One student said Ryan was lucky, while a boy with glasses thought love was just fleeting hormones. As he reflected that Ryan could not escape ordinary habits, he noticed thick fog outside. At that moment, the driver was already struggling to see the road. When he focused his eyes ahead again, he was stunned by the sight before him. Inside the bus, Ryan remains silent after Sheena's confession. She misinterprets his silence and quietly turned around. However, the bus made a violent emergency stop. Ryan reacted instantly and grabbed Sheena's wrist. Startled by this, she called his name in confusion. Then she looked at him and asked what he was doing. But he didn't answer, and when the stop threw them off balance, he pulled her close to shield her. They fell together, leaving her flustered and reminding him their classmates were watching. But Ryan ignored it and urgently ordered everyone to duck. The students reacted just as the windows shattered all at once. A powerful force also began pulling at the back of the bus. The road and surrounding trees twisted inward, and the bus was dragged into a massive vortex. Later that day, the news reporters came reporting a serious traffic accident on Sucheng Expressway. An initial report said a student bus crashed through an overpass, with casualties still unconfirmed. The police sealed off the area, blocking paramedics, and no wounded were seen carried out. But the reporters' team discovered a hidden path that might reveal the truth. Determined to uncover the truth, the reporter urged viewers to follow their investigation. However, someone suddenly blocked their camera, and this made her furious. The camera ended up being knocked to the ground and crushed underfoot. A white-haired man with a woman then warned that some places were not meant to be approached, and that trespassing would only lead to death. Yet the reporter insisted that they were interfering with her freedom of the press. She also boldly declared that she would expose all of them. Before the situation escalated, the ground beneath the man suddenly cracked. The sudden rupture startled him, and when he looked down, he saw a massive hole opening in the earth. He also caught a familiar scent in the air, and asked the woman beside him if she sensed it as well. Before she could respond, someone accused them of trespassing. The police officer stated no one could enter the accident scene at will, so he attempted to drive them away, where he even pushed the white-haired man while issuing a threat. In response, the woman swiftly grabbed his wrist and twisted it, which forced him to cry out in pain. Immediately afterward, the white-haired man presented his identification. He introduced himself as Liam from the Special Investigation Unit. As he handed over his ID, the officer recognized the unit known for never filing cases and for making decisions on site. While he was unsettled by Liam's arrival, Liam asked him to explain the circumstances on site. In response, he hurriedly complied. He led them to the bus and reported that over 10 students and a teacher vanished. Even more unsettling, there were no clues and no blood, as if they vanished. After hearing this, Liam asked about another report. So the officer revealed that a corpse had been discovered. Liam approached the body while the officer said the identity was unknown. The forensic department also said it was mummified in 6 hours, which they found absurd. But Liam's interest was clearly piqued upon hearing this. The officer was unsettled by his reaction and asked whether he had discovered any clues. Unexpectedly, a woman appeared shouting at the officers to let her through. She also accused them of lying and insisted that her son could not be dead. Desperation filled her voice as she begged to be allowed inside. The officer quickly felt sympathy, knowing the woman lived alone with her son. However, Liam narrowed his eyes as he observed her carefully. He then instructed his companion Tao to monitor every family of the missing students. He also emphasized surveillance must cover every hour with no blind spot. While Tao calmly acknowledged the order, the grieving woman began calling out Ryan's name. tears streamed down her face as she demanded to know where he was. A few hours earlier, the students on the bus had been violently thrown. As Ryan recalled, when the bus was swallowed, he heard someone calling his name. Soon after, his eyes slowly opened, revealing a blurry and unfamiliar scene before him. The person beside him was visibly relieved and excited to see that he had awakened. Ryan sat up with sharp pain in his head as Faye and Sheena's voices echoed faintly. When he attempted to stand, he collapsed to the ground instead. Seeing this, Sheena cried out in distress. Ryan, on the other hand, felt his body hurting from the fall. Suddenly, he saw Sheena hurry to his side, with tears welling in her eyes. She even embraced him tightly and expressed her relief that he was safe. However, his eyes widened in shock as he took in the hazy surroundings. Confusion filled his voice as he asked where they were and what had happened to the others. Faye and Sheena exchanged a silent glance. After a moment, Faye pointed upward and said the others were above. Ryan slowly lifted his gaze. He saw their classmates hung unconscious in midair, and Faye said they had been like that before waking. Upon seeing this, Ryan was speechless, but he was interrupted when Sheena began to panic and speculated about their condition. She cried out loudly that they might already be dead. Yet they were suddenly interrupted when all their classmates fell. As each of them regained consciousness, they questioned where they were. Seeing their growing panic, Ryan realized the situation could spiral out of control, but the class monitor stepped forward and urged everyone to stay calm. He insisted they contact the police and asked whose phone still worked. However, when they checked, there was no signal on any of their devices. The discovery sparked more panic, and one student turned to Peter, the class's top achiever. He pressed him for an explanation, and Peter fell into deep thought. He bit his thumb nervously as he considered the worst-case scenario. Suddenly, the monitor mentioned a police station on Shin Road and suggested going for help, but Peter found it naive. When a male student volunteered to go, Peter quickly stopped him. He then approached the monitor and suggested that he should carry out his idea, but the monitor said he couldn't leave because he had to look after everyone. Tension quickly rose as students refused to stay in the strange place any longer. At that moment, Ryan stepped forward and suggested that no one should go alone. He warned that the fog was unnaturally thick and strange, so rash action was dangerous. Peter then turned to Sheena, saying people would help more if someone attractive asked, but his comment earned him an unfriendly glare from Ryan, though he seemed completely unbothered by it. He went on to remind them their teacher was still unconscious, and the driver had vanished. Some students began to cry, as he added that beyond the fog, nothing was visible at all. Turning back to the class monitor, he remarked that finding the police will bring prestige, and the suggestion clearly caught the monitor's attention. After a moment of hesitation, he finally decided that he would go himself. However, Ryan watched Peter's faint smile with suspicion. Meanwhile, the class monitor cautiously approached the wall of thick fog. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he stepped closer, yet he still told everyone to stay put while he went to bring the police back. Hearing this, Sheena quietly prayed for his safe return. At the same time, Peter cautiously raised his hand and reached toward the fog. The moment his fingers touched it, a sharp sting shot through his skin. He quickly withdrew his hand, silently suspecting the mist's true nature. Meanwhile, the class monitor continued walking into the fog. The haze was so thick, and he struggled to recall the police station's direction, but without a warning, he felt his body suddenly stiffen. He quickly looked down and saw that his legs had transformed into bare bones. Panic seized him as he lifted his trembling hand, only to find that it too was rapidly decaying. Following that, a piercing scream echoed through the fog. Ryan quickly heard it, and he turned in alarm. They then recognized the voice of the class monitor, calling for help. He attempted to move back toward, pleading desperately to be saved. However, his feet had already become skeletal. He collapsed and began crawling toward them. Several students cried out that they had to help him, but Ryan stopped them and urged them to wait. They then called him a coward, but he replied that rushing in without a plan was more dangerous. He then turned to Faye for her outerwear, and this left her surprised. So he repeated the request for more outerwears, and she complied, even she's doubtful. Ryan began knotting the outerwear together to form a long makeshift rope. After he tied a rock to one end, he lifted it into the air and threw it toward the fog. The weighted cloth landed near the class monitor, and he shouted for him to grab it. With trembling hands, the monitor seized the fabric, while Ryan pulled with all his strength. The strain was immense, and the knotted cloth began to tear. Seeing this, sweat poured down Ryan's face. After a tense struggle, the monitor was finally dragged back out of the fog. The force of the pull sent him crashing into Ryan. But to everyone's horror, what they saw was his skeleton, and he weakly muttered something about the fog. Before he could finish his words, the students cried out as his remains began to disintegrate. Later that night, Liam was casually biting into a strawberry. Below him lay the corpse of the class monitor. He then remarked that the more polished a fruit appears, the easier it rots under pressure. Yet even as he spoke, he wondered whether there might be an exception this time. Liam remained seated at the scene, while on the other side of the fog, the students also stayed at the same place. Danny among them began to cry, which soon irritated some of the others. He quickly explained he wanted to go home, and that his mother would scold him if he returned late, but he was told to stop crying instead. With no choice, he tried to stifle his sobs, but soon noticed something nearby. He saw someone using a stick to write something, and it was Ryan himself, so he approached and asked what he was doing. Ryan replied he was piecing together the unknown, but the boy only grew more confused. Suddenly, a loud voice asked where they were, and they saw their teacher, Zhao, awake. Clutching his head, he stood up and questioned why there was so much fog. He looked around in confusion, and asked about the bus and the driver. Then he also began questioning the students. He grabbed one of them and reminded them they had been on the bus moments earlier. He also turned to another asking what had happened, but no one answered, so he urged them to speak. Tony then told him to be quiet since no one wanted to explain from the start. Some students also muttered that it was irritating how he often seemed unaware even in class. The atmosphere grew tense, and Ryan quickly sensed it. At that moment, Sheena called his name and grabbed his arm. He turned to her in confusion, and asked what it was. She quietly admitted she needed the restroom, but felt uneasy going with only Faye. Yet hearing this made him visibly flustered and unsure how to respond. Afterward, Sheena walked toward a nearby bush. She told the two of them not to look back. Ryan awkwardly agreed, while Faye assured her she would keep him from turning around. Still, Sheena felt embarrassed that her composed image had faded. Meanwhile, Ryan and Faye stood facing away and heard the noise of her relieving, so both of them felt awkward by the loud noise. Faye was sweating nervously as she struggled to think of something to ease the awkwardness. Her gaze soon fell on Ryan's hand, and she asked what he was holding. He replied that it was a piece torn from the class monitor's shirt, but this surprised her as the monitor's body had already vanished. Ryan said the corpse was gone, but the cloth fragment remained, and he had no explanation. Faye hesitated before asking whether they might eventually die, trapped within the fog. Ryan fell silent, thinking of other dangers, and admitted things might worsen. She was alarmed by this, and she pressed him for clarification. In response, he answered that it's about the food, but their conversation was cut short when Sheena returned thanking them. Noticing their grim expressions, she asked what was wrong, but he replied it was nothing. As time passed, the students huddled together in the corner. One of them asked when they would be able to go back, but no one had an answer. It was also already dark, and hunger began to gnaw at them, so they could do nothing but lower their heads in silence. Meanwhile, a girl admitted she had finished all her food and was starving, so she asked the boy beside her about the last biscuit they supposedly had. He quickly claimed that it was already gone, though in truth, he had hidden it. Upon hearing this, she dejectedly mutters that she's already hungry. However, she saw him moving suspiciously, but he said it was nothing. She then caught sight of the hidden food and demanded a share, yet he shoved her away instead. Then he claimed it was his, so she accused him of pushing her over food after saying he liked her. While he said those feelings were meaningless, Danny observed quietly. He slowly reached into his pocket as the others remained distracted. He then quickly turned back and tried to hide his food. After that, he began to eat without hesitation. Before he could swallow properly, someone suddenly stepped on his back, then kicked him hard, causing him to cough up what he had just eaten. The students quickly gasped when they realized it was their teacher. Ignoring the shock around him, he picked up one of the Danny's foods. The boy cried out that it belonged to him, but the darkened teacher only sneered at his claim. Then he struck him while declaring that it belonged to him now. As Danny lay on the ground in tears, Zhao called for everyone's attention. He ordered the students to hand over all their remaining food, and announced that from that moment on, they were to obey him. Danny stayed sprawled on the ground, as Zhao shouted at everyone to move faster. The other students then began to wonder if their teacher had lost his sanity, but he only continued hurling curses at them, so Sheena trembled and instinctively clung to Faye. Peter, on the other hand, fell silent as Zhao repeated his demand for all remaining food. The threats grew harsher, and Ryan realized the teacher was no longer rational. He also realized that in this fog, only strength ruled. Just then, Zhao suddenly kicked one of the students, targeting a girl who had been clutching some food. The force of the blow was so intense that she coughed up blood. As she lay on the ground, he scolded her for attempting to hide food. After that, he shouted for the next person to hand everything over. The student named Wang was nudged by a classmate, and reminded it was his turn. Wang's jaw tightened with anger hearing this, so he stood up demanding why they should surrender their food, and this stunned the others. They then listen as he accuses Zhao of abusing his authority. Zhao's expression darkened as Wang argued they would all starve if one person hoarded everything. He went further saying that if their parents found out, his life would be miserable. Unexpectedly, Zhao agreed and told him to step forward to take the food. Wang was clearly startled, but his classmates whispered for him not to approach. Despite their warnings, he declared that he was not afraid and that he would return with the food. He then began walking toward Zhao cautiously. As soon as Wang stepped close, Zhao revealed a pen hidden in his sleeve. Then he smiled wickedly. Ryan saw this and knew it's not good, so he immediately shouted for Wang to move, but Wang merely looked up in confusion. In that instant, Zhao lunged forward and stabbed him with the pen. Wang's scream of pain echoed, yet Zhao's smile only widened. The surrounding students instinctively retreated in shock, while Zhao coldly reminded Wang he was the teacher. As Wang clutched his wound, he mocked him for acting brave only moments earlier. He also ranted that they ordered him around, and mocked him because their families had money, so he proceeded to grab Danny by the collar. Then he asked whether the boy planned to run to his wealthy parents, and have them retaliate once they escaped. The boy broke into tears and pleaded for help, but Zhao shoved him aside, and declared they should stop dreaming of leaving this place. The students stared at him in confusion, so he gestured at the endless fog, saying he had never seen anything like it, and in this place there were no authorities, and no arrogant figures above him. So he admitted that he liked it here, and with chilling certainty, he proclaimed that no one would leave alive. His words lingered like a curse, echoing in their minds as hunger gnawed at their bodies. One by one, students began collapsing from weakness. However, Ryan and the others had not yet fully grasped the dire situation. Sheena, on the other hand, also trembled quietly at the side. At the same time, Zhao continued eating with deliberate calmness. When he finished, his sharp gaze slowly swept back toward them. Meanwhile, at the police station, a crowd had gathered due to no updates about the accident. The live reporter also showed parents confronting authorities for explanations. In her interviews, parents vented frustration over the students' continued absence, while some parents wept openly while talking about their missing children. Not far from the scene, Liam observed quietly. Suddenly, he was pressed on what to do next, since the area was quiet for days, especially since they still had not located the gate. Without much hesitation, he finally replied to Tao's question. He met her gaze and replied they'd simply go on since he was patient enough. As he reached toward her, she reminded him that survival of the children was what mattered. After saying this, she immediately slapped the back of his head to stop his antics. But their exchange ended when a loud voice called for the police. It was Ryan's mother, and she's pleading for them to save her son. She insisted he was not dead, and claimed she had seen him, but the officers told her to stop. Liam watched with mild pity, thinking that grief often drove parents to hallucinate. However, Ryan's mother suddenly cried out that she truly had seen her son. She also mentioned that he was surrounded by thick fog, which caused Liam to pause. He then turned to Dao, and asked whose child the woman was referring to. Dao handed him a tablet and informed him that her son was from Class 1. Liam lowered his gaze to the screen, and studied Ryan's information carefully. After a while, Ryan's mother continued begging the police for help, but someone suddenly offered her a bowl of fruit. Liam stepped forward from behind it and softly called out to her. Then he suggests that they speak somewhere quieter. Later, inside a building, Ryan's mother sat trembling with a cup as she recounted the night he went missing. She told them that she had a dream. Liam asked what kind of dream it was, and she said it was strange. In it, Ryan seemed trapped in a dense fog, unable to escape. She saw him running, and she chased him, but she could not catch up, so they kept missing each other. Then, without warning, he appeared right in front of her. She was overjoyed and reached out to hold him, but before her hand could touch his hand turned into scattered sheets of paper, and like a flower losing its petals, he withered before her eyes while still calling her. The sight left her completely stunned. Moments later, she awoke from the dream crying out his name. At the same time, her drink spilled onto the floor, and this draws her attention downward. In the reflection of the water, she saw an image of Ryan pulling something. Remembering that image, she insisted that what she had seen could not have been a hallucination. After listening quietly, Liam turned to Tao and asked whether she had sensed it as well. He considered that the woman herself might be the gate. Meanwhile, Ryan's mother sobbed again, wondering where her son was. As her tears fell into her cup, she once again saw Ryan's image within it. She quickly stopped crying upon seeing this, and clutched the cup tightly while shouting his name. At that same moment, Ryan heard someone calling him and turned instinctively. Faye saw this and asked what was wrong, to which he said he heard a familiar voice, though he quickly dismissed it as his imagination. Before they could dwell on it, Faye turned to Sheena, who suddenly collapsed. She then said Sheena had always been weak, and after so much fear and hunger she might not last. Upon hearing this, Ryan's gaze shifted to Zhao, who's still eating unconcerned. Then he looked back at Sheena, whose condition was visibly worsening. As whispers of hunger spread among the students, Zhao kept eating openly before them. Sheena lay weak beside Faye, her strength nearly gone from starvation, while Wang pressed his hand to his bleeding head. Watching all this, Ryan knew that in the fight for food they had lost defense and they were collapsing. Suddenly, Zhao lifted a bag of potato chips. He waved it in the air and asked who wanted this delicious treat. The student's attention quickly snapped toward him. Wang was tempted, but his eyes fell on the pen still clenched in Zhao's hand. One student muttered that he wanted it, but fear of what happened to Wang kept him back. Zhao then remarked that none of them seemed truly hungry, so he would enjoy it himself. He tore open the bag and began eating. He also deliberately chewed loudly in front of them. The exaggerated crunch echoed, making several students swallow. After a moment, he raised his voice again and asked if no one truly wanted it. When no one responded, he shrugged and prepared to continue eating. Just before the chips reached his mouth, a voice suddenly shouted that he wanted it. All eyes turned to see Tony raising his hand. Zhao studied him for a moment and asked if he truly wanted the chips. Tony quickly nodded and confirmed that he did. Zhao then dropped the chip back and said he remembered Tony. He reminded Tony that he once ignored him and said his father had insulted him too. After saying this, he fixed his gaze on him and asked whether he was correct. Tony could not answer and only stood there sweating nervously. Suddenly, Zhao approached him and said it was not as though he would forbid him from eating. He extended a chip toward him, but ordered him to crawl in circles and bark like a dog for it. Stunned, Tony asked him to repeat what he had said. Zhao's expression darkened as he asked if Tony had failed to understand. In response, Tony declared that he did not want it anymore. Zhao sneered at his refusal and asked if he could keep his pride for one more day. He even extended it to 3 days, and fear spread quietly among them. He continued, suggesting 5 days, and Ryan felt sweat gather on his back. From the side, Peter bit his finger as he added that it could even be 10 days. He then turned back to Tony and asked again if he would still cling to his dignity. Under the weight of hunger, Tony finally sank to his knees. His face darkened and his expression hollow as he began to bark. But when his eyes locked onto the chips in Zhao's hand, he barked louder and cared for nothing. Zhao found the scene amusing, that he burst into laughter as Tony knelt before him. He then mocked that it was a pity Tony's father could not see this, but he would still reward him. Upon hearing this, Tony readily agreed. He reached for the chip Zhao extended, but at the last moment, Zhao deliberately let it fall. He stepped on it and crushed it into the dirt. Then he casually claimed that it had slipped from his hand. So he told Tony that this was all he would receive and asked whether he still wanted it. Tony tremblingly picked up the broken pieces and placed them into his mouth while insisting that he did. He even reached for the fragments again and swallowed them fast. As he gobbled it all down, he even claimed they were delicious. After this, Zhao declared that obedience meant food, and the students scrambled forward. In the chaos, one of the girls ended up all bruised, yet the struggle continued without restraint. Zhao watched with satisfaction and reminded them that compliance would be rewarded. Seeing others finally eating, Danny swallowed hard. He was unable to resist hunger and stood ready to follow Zhao's commands, but Ryan quickly grabbed him and told him not to go. The boy said he was starving and that pleasing Zhao for food did not seem a heavy price. However, Ryan said it was not simple because Zhao was building a throne. Confused by this, the boy asked what he meant. Ryan said that worsening hunger would drive them mad, and once used to begging they would lose resistance. Upon hearing this, the boy asked what would happen next. He then said everyone would kneel beneath the throne, and he could do whatever he pleased. After that, they would become nothing more than slaves trapped within this fog. Before Ryan could say more, Zhao's voice rang out again. When Ryan looked up, he saw him ordering Faye to remove her clothes. Upon hearing his command, Faye was left stunned and pale. But he ignored it and said her friend was starving, so she had to obey. At that moment, Sheena was weakly murmuring that she was hungry. Faye heard her and instinctively turned toward her. Zhao seized the opportunity and tried to grab her, but Faye reacted in time and shouted for him to stop. Zhao's face then twisted with anger at her resistance. He stepped toward her again and ordered her to behave and follow his command. Otherwise, he warned she would end up like the others. Faye's trembling gaze shifted to the chaotic scene around them. Students fought viciously over scraps and striking without restraint. Suddenly, Ryan stood up and called out Faye's name. However, Danny pulled him back and whispered he would get himself killed, so Ryan could only curse under his breath. Meanwhile, Faye's body shook as she cried out for help, but Zhao merely smiled and beckoned her closer. As he advanced, she trembled, but someone shouted that Zhao would not care for a little girl. Ryan also heard this and lifted his head in shock. While Zhao and Faye both turned toward the source of the voice, a woman went forward to keep Zhao company, and the students were relieved to see their teacher Sarah awake. Ryan stared in disbelief, so the boy explained she had fallen too. They had been unconscious in the chaos, and he woke beside her, but she had remained unconscious, likely due to a severe injury, so several girls had taken turns caring for her. Yet now that she was awake, he believed an adult could control the situation. However, Peter smiled because the world of adults was not that simple. Yun also agreed that things might not turn out as hopefully as they wished. Meanwhile, Zhao fell silent upon Sarah's arrival, but his eyes burned with fury, and he questioned her. Sarah warned that Faye was just a child, and if the police found them, he would struggle to explain. However, Zhao stared at Sarah in confusion as to what she meant. Then he burst into laughter, saying she still didn't understand their situation. So he then declared that they were all going to die anyway. He pointed to the ghostly mist around them, claiming it could turn people into dried corpses. The students also listened in fear as he said no one had searched for them. He also added that the dried corpses they had seen earlier would mysteriously vanish. His gaze also swept over the nearby bodies as he coldly asked who would come to save them, and added that even if someone could, they have no time left, so within 2 days, half of them would starve and they were doomed. Listening to this, Sarah found herself unable to refute his words. Suddenly, Zhao approached her, reminding her how eager she had been to protect Faye, so she could replace her, and they might as well indulge, since they were all doomed. With that, he coldly ordered Sarah to take off her clothes. The command stunned her, and fear finally surfaced in her eyes. When she did not respond immediately, he turned to Faye and ordered her to comply instead. Before he could move closer, Sarah shielded Faye, and this made Faye feel scared for her. But Sarah still forced herself to say that she would do it. Tears welled up in Faye's eyes as she tried to stop her. However, Sarah only asked everyone to turn around. Zhao also agreed and ordered the students to face away. Afterward, he licked his lips and told Sarah to come closer. Sarah then proceeded to reach for her shirt and slowly began to unbutton it, but someone suddenly rushed forward and shouted at them to stop. She then froze in shock when she realized it was Ryan. However, Zhao's face twisted with fury as he demanded whether Ryan had a death wish. Upon seeing Zhao holding the pen, Ryan revealed that he knew where they were. More than that, he claimed he knew how to keep them alive. The other students were stunned hearing this and wondering if they'd heard him wrong. Just like them, Zhao stared at Ryan and asked what he had just said. Ryan calmly repeated that he knew where they were and how they could survive, but Sarah warned him not to provoke Zhao, so he calmly said he knew what he was doing. He even said they shouldn't compromise with scum like Zhao, which enraged him. So he shouted that he would cripple him if he kept talking nonsense. He then raised the pen in his hand and aimed it straight at Ryan's eyes. Seeing this, Faye cried out Ryan's name in panic, yet Zhao suddenly stopped mid-motion. He froze when he sensed an unusual chill coming from Ryan. He studied him closely and realized his gaze was unlike that of an ordinary middle schooler. Suddenly Peter suggested hearing Ryan out, but Zhao asked why he should listen. In response, Peter asked him if he wanted to leave this place. Zhao's anger flared at this, but he hesitated when Peter noted many students were dissatisfied. After that, Peter gestured for Ryan to explain himself, yet Ryan did not speak immediately. He stared straight at Zhao, who clenched his teeth in fury. But in the end, he gave in and warned him not to talk nonsense, or he will be torn apart. Ryan finally smiled and urged them to calm, as he explained the mist had cut them off from the outside. Because of this, he compared it to being stranded on an island with rescue unlikely soon. However, Zhao reminded him everyone knew that, and accused him of wasting time. Ryan then calmly stated that what he really meant was they were still in H City. More specifically, he tells them they were in the downtown area within the third ring, but the students dismissed it as nonsense, insisting the police would have found them. Yet Peter suddenly silenced them, saying he trusted Ryan's judgment, so he urged him to continue. Ryan quickly told everyone to examine the floor tiles and the lawn beside the bench. He noted the grass was agrostis edged with violets, and the wooden path rose over shallow steps among the trees. The students finally noticed this, but one argued similarity alone wasn't significant. Ryan then added that even the magnolia lampposts marked H City's third ring district. Most importantly, he got a flyer with H City's area code, so they were in its third ring east side, which meant it was also the place where their car accident had occurred. Hearing they were still in H City eased the students, giving some hope of returning home. Zhao, however, dismissed Ryan's reasoning as empty words meant only to gain approval. Soon doubts rose as they wondered if they were truly in H City, since no one searched for them. Some also wondered if the whole city was swallowed by the fog. Ryan admitted there's still mystery, but downtown should have nearby stores. So, if they found one store, they could secure food and supplies to survive until rescue. Despite this reasoning, some students asked if they could survive the man-killing fog. At that moment, Ryan suddenly recalled the strange voice he had heard earlier. But before he could reflect, Zhao warned they might all end as dried corpses. So he asked if Ryan was saving them or leading them to death. The group immediately fell silent upon hearing this. Peter, on the other hand, quietly pinched the bridge of his nose. As he stood up, he thought judging was easy, but fear was hard to overcome. So he looked at Ryan, wondering what choice he would ultimately make. However, Ryan remained silent for a moment. Zhao then reminded him they were trapped, and demanded he explain how to leave. Ryan raised his head at last, and firmly declared that he would go to find the way out. Afterward, the pile of food lay scattered across the ground. Ryan's group ate quietly, while Zhao reminded him he had finally given him what he wanted. But Ryan did not respond and simply continued eating. So Zhao said Ryan had boasted about finding a way out, and began to threaten him if he failed. Ryan finally told Zhao to relax, since if he failed he'd already be dead in the fog. Hearing this, Zhao remarked that he would indeed die first, but the statement shocked the boy. Yet Zhao added that Ryan's death would not end the matter. As he spoke, he suddenly grabbed Sheena and pulled her toward him. Faye immediately tried to pull Sheena back, but Zhao seized her and said he knew Ryan was close to Sheena, so he would keep her. He also warned Ryan of the consequences if he tried tricks. Then he leaned close to Sheena to show it. Disgusted by this, she quickly turned her head away and called Ryan's name. Ryan quickly stood, telling Zhao to come with him, and Danny since they needed 3 people. However, Zhao narrowed his eyes and replied that it would not be possible. He claimed that he had to remain there to control the others, so he turned to the others and offered more food if anyone would join Ryan. However, the group fell silent. Suddenly, someone stepped forward and volunteered. It was Peter, and the others looked at him in surprise. Even Ryan himself was taken aback by Peter's initiative. After a moment, the 3 of them gathered together. Ryan still asked Peter if he was sure, and Peter calmly said he wanted to contribute. At last, the 3 faced the thick fog, and Ryan remarked the situation was just as he had suspected. Danny then nervously asked whether they would end up like their class monitor, but Ryan told him that they still had a chance. With that, they walked toward as the others watched them vanish into the fog. Among them was Sheena, who stared at their departing backs. She was also unable to stop the tears from falling as she thought about Ryan. After a while, Ryan suddenly shouted for the other 2 to stop. Danny immediately asked what was wrong. Ryan said the monitor had seemed normal in this zone, and Peter confirmed it. After knowing this, he slowly raised his hand and carefully reached toward the fog. But the sight frightened Danny, who anxiously asked what he was doing. Peter also began to sweat nervously, while Danny warned Ryan that it was dangerous. Ryan's hand quickly paused in midair for a moment. However, he gritted his teeth and pushed forward to thrust his hand into the fog. Danny quickly covered his eyes, fearing Ryan might turn into a corpse, but Peter urged him to look. At that moment, Ryan's heart pounded loudly in his chest, as his hand remained inside the fog. When he slowly opened his eyes, he discovered that his hand was completely unharmed. A deep sigh of relief escaped him, as the result matched what he had expected. He then said the area ahead seemed safe, and Danny asked if they'd avoid becoming corpses. Before he could answer, Peter noted that even the strangest phenomena still obeyed rules. He reasoned that though the fog was unknown, it seemed harmless within a certain range. So he asked Ryan if he was trying to determine the boundaries of this safe zone. Ryan did not answer directly, but instead he told them not to follow him. Danny immediately asked where he was going, so he simply replied that he might be heading somewhere that was not so safe. Alarmed by this, Danny urged him not to go. Peter, however, remained silent and merely watched Ryan. Ryan then stepped forward and slowly approached the thick fog. He also raised his arm in the air, and with a tense expression on his face, he began to move his hand farther into the mist. Danny watched nervously and unsure of what they should do next. Suddenly, they heard Ryan scream, and he quickly asked what had happened. At that moment, Ryan was drenched in sweat as sharp pain coursed through his hand. But Danny continued calling his name in worry, so he finally replied and warned them not to come any closer. He also assured them that he was fine. However, when he lowered his gaze, horror filled his eyes. One of his fingers had already begun to dry up. Suddenly, Peter asked whether he had discovered anything, but he only picked up a rock and began drawing on the ground. After marking a line, he pointed to it and explained that this should be the boundary. He then stood up, confirming that crossing here could turn one into a corpse. Yet Danny saw nothing and said Zhao would beat them if they returned empty-handed. Peter then suggested they'd need to cross the barrier to get food and asked Ryan for ideas. Ryan noted that fog drifts toward crowds, yet here it didn't, which puzzled him. Hearing this, Peter began thinking about the relationship between fog, drifting air, and people. After a moment of thought, something suddenly occurred to him. Ryan confirmed Peter's realization that the key factor was people's presence. He explained that where they gathered, the fog was thinner and let them move freely. But once someone left the group, the fog turned deadly and grew denser. It was like a fire in the dark, with each person serving as a source of light. The more sources there were, the wider the illuminated area would become. After hearing this explanation, Danny finally began to understand. Ryan continued, saying the fog turned fatal past a certain distance, but knowing that limit could keep them safe. Peter admitted Ryan's reasoning made sense, but asked what if they were wrong. Ryan calmly replied that if they were wrong, it would only mean dying sooner or later. After Peter admitted he might be overthinking, he asked their next step. Ryan then turned his attention toward the fog ahead. He glanced at the line and said they must measure the farthest safe distance. Suddenly, Peter called to Danny to try, and Danny stared back in shock, so he explained that Danny should contribute as well. However, Ryan said the idea was his, so he should try first. Still, Peter replied that he had said that dying sooner or later made no difference, so he pushed Danny while saying that since he'd come along, he had to prove his value. The sudden push caused Danny to fall to the ground. Yet Peter continued urging him and insisting that it was his turn to go first. Danny quickly hesitated as he feared Ryan's judgment was wrong, yet he gritted his teeth as he thought about how Ryan had always taken care of him. So he gathered his courage and he finally declared that he would do it. He finally stood up and faced the fog with nervous steps. Ryan noticed his tense posture and reminded him he didn't have to force himself. In response, he assured him that he could manage it, though inside he was trembling with fear. His hands were also shaking uncontrollably. For a moment, he wondered whether Ryan had felt the same fear earlier. The monitor's fate also flashed in his mind, and he knew he didn't want the same end. So as his hands slowly reached toward the fog, he silently prayed that he would not die. Meanwhile, back where the others were waiting, the students continued to huddle together. Some of them had already fainted from hunger, while the rest wondered whether Ryan's group would return, since 2 days had already passed. At that moment, Sarah noticed the worsening condition of the students. Zhao, on the other hand, was dozing off while surrounded by piles of food. Seeing this, she decided to approach him. She asked if he could share some of the food with the students. She even explained that if things continued like this, some of them would starve to death, but he merely told her to leave him alone. Nevertheless, she continued to plead and insisted that the students could no longer endure, yet he only burst into laughter, and this left her confused. He then asked why it should matter to him whether those students lived or died. Hearing this, Sarah trembled with anger. She then shouted that they were all just children. She reminded him someone had already gone for food, and asked him to share until they returned. However, his eyes stared coldly at her. He then stood up and said that it seemed she truly wanted to die. Sarah quickly stepped back when she heard his words. However, he continued saying Ryan only ate his food and went to die in the fog. Despite this, Sarah insisted that they must still be alive. Zhao smiled mockingly at the thought. Then he pointed out that the boys had already been gone for 2 days. So, if food was truly that close, there was no reason for such a delay. She then tried to argue against his reasoning, but Sheena's voice broke the tension, as she quietly prayed for Ryan's safety. The sound of it caused Zhao's patience to snap. He immediately strode toward her. Then he raised his hand, and slapped her across the face. Sheena fell from the force of the blow, and Sarah cried out her name in alarm. But Zhao had already grabbed Sheena by the collar. He then shouted that Ryan was already dead. He also added that those brats deserved it for tricking him out of food. However, she clutched at him and refused to believe it. She insisted that Ryan would not die, and that she believed in him. Hearing this only made Zhao's anger flare even more. He violently shoved her to the ground, and the impact made her cry out in pain. He then asked her if she knew why he had kept her there all this time. He said he had once hoped they would succeed, but none had returned, so there was no point in keeping her any longer. Horror filled Sheena's face as she desperately told him to stop, yet he ignored her pleas, and moved closer to her. In the struggle, her clothes were torn apart. She then desperately cried out for help from the others. However, none of the students dared to respond to her calls. They remained silent and lowered their heads. At that moment, Faye rushed forward and grabbed Zhao to stop him. Zhao glanced at her coldly, and said that she was courting death. Without hesitation, he kicked her away. The force of the blow made her immediately cough up blood. Seeing Faye lying there, Sheena cried out her name in distress. However, Zhao blocked her path and forced her back. He said he once watched her ride in luxury cars while he mopped floors, and it never sat well with him. Now, however, she was completely within his grasp. Thus, he could do whatever he wanted. At that moment, Faye struggled to stand up in order to help Sheena. Yet as she tried, she realized everyone was too weak from hunger to stand against him. So Sheena was left all helpless, until she heard a loud bang. She looked up to see Sarah behind Zhao, clutching a brick she had just slammed into his head. Sarah quickly pulled Sheena into her arms, and assured her all would be well. Even so, her hands trembled, as she gripped the loose floor tile. Sheena then clung to her and cried in relief, yet her expression shifted to pure horror, as she looked behind Sarah. Sarah did not notice Zhao rising behind her, and asked what was wrong. Before she could react, Zhao grabbed her by the hair. He then furiously said that it seemed she truly wanted to die, and since that was the case, he hit her with the pen. Then he dragged the sharp tip across her face, causing her to scream in agony. Sheena, on the other hand, trembled helplessly as she witnessed this. Later after that, Ryan's group finally returned. The moment the other students saw them, they were shocked. Suddenly, Peter stepped forward, announcing they had found food. The students were stunned when they saw the bag full of food. Yet, they rushed forward in excitement and praised Peter for his kindness. Danny saw this and thought Peter was stealing Ryan's spotlight, but Ryan didn't mind. He then walked toward Sheena and asked what had happened to Sarah. Sheena hurriedly began recounting everything that occurred. As Ryan listened, he fell silent when he noticed Sheena's torn clothes. His gaze then shifted to Sarah, who tried to stop the bleeding on her face. He also saw Faye lay on the ground with a painful expression. Seeing all of this, anger surged within him. He proceeded to grab a bat lying nearby, and this confused Sheena. Just as he swung the bat towards Zhao, someone questioned what he was doing. His shoulder was even grabbed to stop him. When he turned around, he realized it was Peter holding him back. He immediately asked if Peter was trying to protect Zhao, but Peter denied it and said Zhao still had to face judgment. More importantly, it had to happen in front of everyone. Ryan was confused by what he meant, so he explained that if they wanted to leave, they couldn't rely on intelligence alone, since what mattered most was the human mind. Meanwhile, in the real world, Ryan's mother's profile was being examined. Suddenly, Tao arrived, carrying a bowl of fruit for Liam. As she set it on his desk, she asked if Ryan's mother was truly the door. Liam admitted he didn't know since it was unpredictable. He also added while looking at Ryan's mother that no one could know who it would be. Tao then suggested asking the organization for help, since the students still hadn't been found. However, he only laughed, which annoyed her. He then replied that she still had a childish side that didn't match her appearance. She grew even more confused when he said it didn't matter where the students were. He pointed at the maps and said they could be here or in other places. They might even be in the room or the mall, but unseen and untouchable. So as long as they located the door, he believed that all problems would naturally be solved. That was why Ryan's mother was under observation now. Still, Tao reminded him it had been 2 weeks, and he agreed someone should find something soon, especially since the real trick was time. Back on the other side, Zhao ordered everyone around him to stay quiet. However, they did not comply, so he angrily told someone to shut his mouth. Danny, who was munching on his food, was startled by this. He quickly reported to Ryan that Zhao was already awake. Zhao then saw he was tied up and demanded release, but Peter said it was only the beginning. Suddenly, Ryan said they would release him, but he had to promise not to harm the students. However, he sneered they'd vanished 2 days, and only returned after eating. Hearing this made Danny furious, and he argued that they had not been gone for that long. But one of the students confirmed that they had indeed been gone for 2 days. So they asked why they hadn't returned sooner, but Danny insisted that's not true. However, Ryan could not help but curse when he heard this, since he just realized that something unexpected had happened. One student then began asking what they had encountered during their absence. Upon hearing this, Danny recounted what had happened. Back then, he stretched his hand forward and touched the fog in front of them. With his eyes closed, he asked Ryan if he was turning into a dried corpse, but he only heard Peter calling him a dumbass, which made him finally open his eyes. To his surprise, he was completely unharmed, so he happily asked Ryan if they were fine. Ryan replied that it seemed they were still within the safe range. However, they could see that more fog stretched farther ahead. Because of this, he told them that their next move was to continue moving forward. After that, Peter took his turn testing the fog with his hand. Once he confirmed it was safe, he drew a line on the ground with a rock. Then Danny tested the fog again. Whenever it was confirmed safe, they would mark the ground with another line. In this way, the three of them continued taking turns, extending their hands into the fog. When it was Ryan's turn again, Danny reminded him to be careful. Peter also warned that the farther they went, the greater the risk, but Ryan only responded with a smile. Then he stepped forward into the fog. Danny saw this and anxiously called out his name. However, Ryan's eyes widened by what he saw. Danny then quickly asked what was wrong ahead, yet the moment he looked forward, he was also stunned. They saw a supermarket ahead and realized they were indeed downtown. Back in the present, Danny said they packed the food after, and the trip should have been 2 hours only. Upon hearing this, the students who had been questioning them fell silent. Sheena then turned to Ryan and asked what on earth was happening. Peter also looked at Ryan and asked if he had already figured it out. Ryan replied that he might have a rough guess now. Curious, Sheena asked what the answer was. Peter and Ryan then explained they were trapped not just by space but also by time. Meanwhile, in the real world, Ryan's mother's brain waves were being monitored. At that moment, Liam and Tao arrived. The doctor noticed them and greeted them. Liam immediately asked if the connection had already been established, but the doctor replied that it had not. He then noted 4 days had passed, and questioned Ryan's mother's fitness to be the door. The doctor nervously replied that time-based connections held many possibilities. However, this made Dao ask if they could measure the phenomenon but not control it. Liam said becoming the door required deep longing and stronger than normal brainwaves. Because of this, it was not something that technology alone could solve. So Ryan and his mother were the most likely pair capable of forming the door. Hearing this, Tao quickly asked if no one else could become the door besides them. Liam replied that there was actually another one. However, he pointed out that if that person became the door, the situation would be far more dangerous, since that person was Peter. Back in the other world, Ryan reminded them they were trapped not only by space. So Sheena, Zhao, and the others were stunned to learn they were also trapped in time. Faye quickly asked what he meant by that. Ryan explained they were stuck not only by the fog but also by a deviation from real time. One student then asked what deviation meant and if it would affect their chances of returning. Others also began asking how much their time differed from reality, since they just wanted to go home. As panic slowly spread among them, he tried to calm everyone down. However, his attempt was interrupted by a loud mocking laugh nearby. When he turned to look, he realized it was coming from Zhao. He was laughing uncontrollably to the point that tears formed in his eyes. Danny became annoyed and pushed him. While asking why he was laughing, Zhao suddenly fell silent and stared at him. Startled by the look in his eyes, he quickly hid behind Ryan. Zhao then said Ryan's story of the third ring and supermarket might be nonsense to trick them. He also said space and time were meaningless, and they were trapped in hell forever. Hence, he told them that they would be better off learning from him. He also asked if they believed they could go home, and if finding food made them think all was fine. But he doesn't think so, and he shouted that they could simply wait together for death. His frightening laughter echoed through the area, leaving the students terrified. Yet the laughter stopped when a bat was pointed directly at his face. Zhao looked up as Peter remarked that there were still many problems they had to solve, but the first one was Zhao himself. Hearing this, he tried to struggle against his restraints. However, Peter only smiled at his helpless state. He then turned to the others saying they had suffered too much. He also admitted that he himself felt tortured by this, yet he believed they should trust and rely on the companions beside them. Several students quickly wept as Peter said no one knew how long they could survive there. So he pointed the bat at Zhao, accusing him of worsening their suffering through selfishness. He accused him of stealing food, beating the students, and bullying the girls. He even pointed out that Zhao had disfigured their respected teacher, Sarah. Because of this, he declared that he would not allow such a disgusting adult to stay, and that Zhao deserved to be punished. The students quickly voiced their agreement. Zhao heard their response and anxiously asked Peter what he intended to do. In return, Peter simply raised a finger to his lips in a silent gesture. In that instant, Zhao became horrified by what he saw. After all, Peter quietly muttered that he planned to kill him. The angry voices of the students soon followed, demanding that Zhao be punished. At that moment, Zhao was still in disbelief at Peter's words. However, Peter interrupted him and said he had to pay for the terrible things he'd done. He then slowly raised the bat in his hand and asked who wanted to be the first to carry out the punishment. Upon seeing the bat glistening before them, the students were confused. What followed was a heavy silence from the crowd. Nearby, Faye wondered what Peter truly intended, since he was no longer the same person. Ryan's brows also furrowed as he tried to understand Peter's reasoning. Meanwhile, Sheena wondered if they'd strike Zhao, while Danny worried what to do. Suddenly, Sarah quickly stepped forward to stop them from making a terrible mistake. However, she was halted when someone grabbed her wrist. She turned around and heard Ryan urging her not to go over there. She then reminded him she was their teacher, and it was her duty to stop the students. But Ryan replied that he was afraid she could no longer stop what was about to happen. At that moment, Tony was already holding the bat in front of Zhao. Yet Zhao was convinced he would never dare strike him, and even urged him to try. Just as he expected, Tony hesitated and eventually let go of the bat. He immediately burst into laughter, mocking Tony as a spoiled brat too cowardly to kill. Hearing this, Tony's body trembled in fear, yet Peter calmly picked up the bat. Then he handed it back to him, reminding him not to be afraid since Zhao was tied up. He even asked if Tony wanted revenge, and urged him to recall what happened earlier. After all, he had once been forced into a desperate corner in front of everyone's eyes. Peter continued whispering to Tony, telling him that everything that had happened was because of Zhao. Hearing this made Tony's expression gradually turn empty. He finally raised the bat and prepared to strike Zhao, but Sarah rushed forward, reminding him that he could not do such a thing. Peter heard this, and immediately questioned her interference. She insisted they were still students, and warned their futures would be ruined if they hurt someone. But Peter responded by asking whether she intended to let such scum go free. Sarah said they could just keep Zhao tied up, since they had enough food now. However, he asked if she knew what they had seen after leaving, and she asked what he meant. He explained that outside looked just like their normal world, with supermarkets full of goods. There's also bright and clean restaurants, and even tidy parks nearby. Yet there was one thing they had not seen during all that time. There were no animals, no people, and this revelation shocked everyone. The students listened nervously as Peter asked if they understood what that meant. He declared that in this world they could only rely on themselves for protection. So he asked Sarah if she wanted Zhao to stay among them since he could still threaten them. He even asked if she wanted them treated like dogs, and Tony trembled hearing this. Sarah, on the other hand, found herself unable to refute his reasoning. Before she could respond, a sudden scream erupted behind her. By the time she looked back, Tony had already struck Zhao. Even more unsettling was the sight of Tony smiling as he did it. The scene unfolding before them left everyone unable to move. Zhao lay on the ground, screaming in pain after being struck, yet Tony felt a strange sense of satisfaction as he looked at him. Peter then tapped Tony on the shoulder and praised him for what he had done. He also whispered that Zhao would no longer dare to insult him again. Soon after, the bat slipped from Tony's hand, and he collapsed to his knees. At that moment, someone in the crowd shouted it was his turn, and Tony looked up to see Wang. Wang calmly stated that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Hearing this made Zhao plead with him not to act impulsively. However, Wang immediately struck him with the bat, and told him that he could scream all he wanted. After all, there were still many people waiting behind him for their turn. Zhao could only helplessly beg for mercy after seeing them. But one by one, the students began taking turns beating him. Even the girl he had kicked earlier stepped forward to strike him. As the blows continued, some students urged the others to hit Zhao harder. Not far away, Peter watched the scene with a faint smile on his face. On the other side, Sarah trembled, as she muttered that what they were doing was wrong. Sheena also whispered to Ryan that Zhao would be killed, and asked if they could stop them. However, he replied that every person was like fire, which could give warmth but also cause pain. Now that the flames of everyone had gathered, they had turned into a raging monster. After some time, Zhao lay motionless and severely wounded from the beating. Some students smiled with satisfaction, while others, like Ryan, felt conflicted. Suddenly, Peter reminded him that it was his turn. He then asked whether he still needed to participate. Peter quickly answered that he did. He also reminded him that everyone was watching. He added they needed unity to survive, and he still needed Ryan's wisdom and courage. But Ryan remained silent listening to this. Now the two sides faced each other, where Ryan's group was still clean, while Peter's was stained with blood. At that moment, Zhao weakly began saying it was already enough. He even begged Peter and the others to let him go, yet Peter simply smiled, as Zhao promised never to repeat his actions again. He proceeded to step forward and declared that evil must be eradicated. Then he raised the bat as he urged Zhao to go to another world. Sarah rushed forward in an attempt to stop him, but Tony and the others seemed eager to see what would happen next. Without hesitation, Peter strikes Zhao while saying he can now confess his sins. As blood splattered onto Peter's face, Zhao struggled to curse him. With his final breath, he muttered that Peter had deceived him. After that, the area fell silent as Peter dropped the bat. Then, as if nothing unusual had happened, he began wiping his stained eyeglasses. Later after that, the students finally stepped out of the fog. Wang was among them, and he was stunned by the sight before his eyes. The other students noticed his reaction, and hurried forward as well. Like him, Faye was shocked, as she confirmed that what Ryan had said was true. The city standing before them was indeed H-City. Some students began running around, celebrating that they would no longer have to starve. Peter also reminded them that as long as they stayed outside the fog's range they were safe. With that reassurance, he declared that their celebration could finally begin. But Ryan asked if he wasn't worried trouble might arise again. He quickly replied that everyone had long been depressed and needed to release emotions. Just as he said, the students excitedly began exploring the supermarket. Tony opened a bag of chips and could not stop himself from crying at how delicious it tasted. Nearby, Wang saw the shelves full and thought they had enough food for a month. On the other side, a boy offered one of the girls her favorite food. However, she immediately slapped his hand away. Then she scolded him for only thinking of her now, yet still thanked him, since she realized that, compared to him, Peter was far more reliable. At that moment, several girls gathered around Peter admiring him. Ryan and Sheena also watched as the others declared Peter the most dependable. However, Sheena soon noticed that Ryan seemed absent-minded. Ryan's attention was fixed on the clock nearby. After a moment, something seemed to click in his mind. He quickly asked them to take out their phones, but Faye objected since there was no signal. Yet he still urged her to take it out, so the two girls hurriedly pulled out their phones. Then the three compared the times, finding the clocks differed by several minutes. Seeing this, Ryan finally confirmed his suspicion. He explained that the deviation wasn't just perception, but a real difference in how time flowed. Sheena quickly asked what this meant for their situation. He replied that he had begun to suspect something, and in his view, they were simply in another H city. Upon hearing this, she asked what he meant, but the sound of a bottle being opened interrupted them. The liquid was also poured into a wine glass, and sitting nearby was Peter, who was casually taking a sip. He even commented that it was a fine wine. However, his gaze remained fixed on Ryan. Ryan turned toward him just as he remarked that a new play was about to begin. He then slowly poured out the wine and asked Ryan what he would choose. Suddenly, they heard a loud scream, and they turned toward the source. There, they saw Danny lying on the ground, while another student stomped on him. The student was still not satisfied and continued hitting Danny. The others merely watched as he insulted him. He even mocks him for doing nothing but eating. Faced with the accusations, Danny could only apologize repeatedly. The student then decided to punch him in order to take back the food. However, his wrist was suddenly grabbed, so he quickly turned to the side. There he saw Ryan holding his arm tightly. Ryan also pulled him forward with force, causing him to stumble and crash into the nearby shelves. Furious by this, he demanded to know what Ryan wanted. Yet Ryan calmly replied that he should be the one asking that question. The student then accused Danny of stealing his canned food, and claimed he was just taking it back. But Faye asked what canned food he meant, since he didn't own the supermarket. The student dismissed her, and said picking the food first made it his. Faye became furious at his reasoning, but Ryan quickly stopped her. His gaze then shifted toward the other students. They were just casually eating and relaxing. So he asked them whether they truly believed they were safe. He warned them the city was still fog-bound, and danger could strike any time. Yet under such circumstances, they were already starting internal conflicts over trivial things. However, the boy dismissed Ryan's warning, saying there was no danger left. Suddenly, they heard another voice speak up in agreement with Ryan. It was Peter, and he reminded them they needed to stay united, especially now. He also warned that supplies would run out, so food must be shared carefully. Listening to this made Ryan turn to look at him and fell silent. Just then, a girl spoke up, agreeing with Peter as she picked up a fallen bottle. Everyone turned to see who it was, and realized that it was Shen. She slowly walked toward Sheena and Faye, whose expressions immediately hardened with anger. After all, she had remained silent throughout the earlier conflicts, and she had only appeared now. Regardless, Shen said every group needs a leader or it will fall apart like sand. She also added that after the last crisis, it was clear who could lead. So she pointed directly at Peter, and declared that he was the most suitable. Peter responded with a casual smile as he adjusted his glasses. Many students also agreed Peter was the most reliable to manage food, but the student who had been attacking Danny stood there in stunned silence. He pointed at Peter and angrily asked why he should listen to him when they were all classmates. But Ryan countered, asking why he could take food, but Danny couldn't if they were all classmates. The boy was left speechless by this, and unable to find any words to argue back, he eventually walked away. Peter observed the entire exchange while his eye was on Ryan. At that moment, a faint sneer appeared on his face. Later inside the mall, Sheena and Faye were strolling when they heard voices nearby. They then saw the other girls trying on expensive bags and clothes. Shen was also among them, and was being praised for how well the outfits suited her. Seeing this scene, Sheena quickly reminded them that it would be bad if the others found out. The girls were surprised by her sudden appearance. One of them asked if she thought anyone would scold them, and said if she was scared, she should not take one. Suddenly, Shen commented that a beauty like Sheena did not need any external decoration. However, she whispered that if she were Sheena, she would want to show her best self, especially in front of the boy she liked, and hearing this made Sheena's eyes widen. Her gaze slowly drifted toward the clothes displayed inside the store. Yet Faye noticed her conflicted expression, and called her name with concern. Meanwhile, inside the internet cafe, Tony and several other boys had booked the entire place. Peter was also there listening as they confirmed the computers could still run games. Just as he was about to leave, someone called out to him. It was Wang, who asked if he wanted to join since they needed one more player. After a brief moment of silence, he declined and told them to enjoy themselves. Meanwhile, Ryan stood alone on a balcony outside looking at the empty city. But his attention was drawn to a nearby voice saying the others were naive. He turned his head and saw Peter with a glass of wine, which he casually offered. So he immediately replied that he did not drink. Peter merely smiled hearing this. He then set the glass down, and asked Ryan if he understood their situation. He figured most of the others had not realized what had truly happened, since they didn't really grasp the crisis, which was why they could still worry about cosmetics. Some were even playing games, focusing only on the superficial benefits. He then pointed out the empty city with only them left, and asked Ryan what that truly meant. He also admitted that while the others hadn't realized it, he believed Ryan already had. So he went on to say that the two of them were different from the rest. Hence, he began asking him to work together, because they would surely be able to realize the true value of this empty city. But Ryan did not respond to his proposal, and only looked at him deeply. After a moment, Peter finally turned to look at Ryan. However, he was shocked when Ryan said he had no interest in something so boring. Without another word, he walked away, leaving Peter. He even slammed the door loudly behind him. Angered by this, Peter crushed the wine glass and muttered Ryan's name under his breath. Later that night, inside a hotel, Tony slumped onto the bed, feeling completely comfortable. Shen, on the other hand, leisurely bathed in a tub filled with milk and roses. Like them, Danny also felt at ease as he slept soundly on his bed. However, Faye could not help but shed tears alone, since she realized that Sheena had suddenly disappeared from their room. At that moment inside the supermarket, someone was busily grabbing a flashlight. It was Ryan, and he carefully turned it on to see if it was working. Then he quickly placed it into his bag. As he finished, he suddenly noticed a shadow passing outside. Confused by this, he quickly turned around, and he saw a girl walking toward a nearby store. He looked more closely, and he realized that it was Sheena. Later, inside the clothing store, Sheena stood quietly, staring at the dress displayed on a mannequin. She felt conflicted as she looked at it, but Shen's earlier words about dressing up for the boy she liked echoed in her mind. Determination gradually appeared on her face, and she reached forward to take the dress. But she was startled when someone called her name. She turned around, and saw Ryan asking what she was doing there so late. She then replied that she couldn't sleep, and just wanted to walk outside. After saying this, she asked why he was also there with a backpack. He briefly explained he was gathering necessities, and warned her not to wander alone. But this made her say he was always reliable, and that without him she might already be gone. With that thought, she suddenly stood on her tiptoes. Then she asked if he would continue protecting her all the time. Ryan's gaze immediately shifted to the side. She quickly panicked due to this, and tried to explain herself. But before she could speak further, he covered her mouth with his hand. Then he whispered to her to stay quiet. After removing his hand, she nervously asked what was wrong. He quickly pulled her aside and whispered that someone seemed to be moving outside. The two of them hid and quietly watched, as someone in a raincoat walked past the store. After seeing this, they looked at each other with confusion. They soon realized that the person had just come from the supermarket. But Ryan grew suspicious because the person wore a raincoat even though there was no rain. The two of them then decided to go to the front of the supermarket to investigate. As soon as they arrived, Ryan smelled something unusual, which made Sheena worry. Not long after, his expression turned serious, as he realized that something was not right. Moments later, they saw the inside of the supermarket beginning to be engulfed in flames. Ryan immediately ordered Sheena to find the others, and she quickly complied. After she left, he placed his bag on the counter to reach for the fire extinguisher. But he looked at the corner, and found it missing. He was then confused, as he clearly remembered seeing it there earlier. With no other choice, he ran toward the staff room. He forcefully kicked the door open, and he finally spotted a faucet and a bucket inside. Meanwhile, inside the hotel, Sheena announced the supermarket was on fire and urged them to help put it out. When they all rushed to the scene, they were shocked by the size of the fire. One of the students quickly told everyone to fetch water from the nearby restroom. So the students moved swiftly, carrying buckets of water and throwing them toward the flames. Ryan was among them, repeatedly splashing water onto the growing fire. However, everyone soon realized that the flames were only becoming fiercer. At that moment, Ryan looked up at the ceiling and suddenly remembered something. He stared at the overhead sensors, wondering if they had stopped working. Then his gaze shifted toward the entrance where thick smoke was escaping. Without wasting another moment, he ordered everyone to close the door. The others immediately questioned him, fearing that the smoke would suffocate them. However, Peter ordered them to follow his instructions. One of the girls quickly pressed the door button, and once the door closed, the smoke had nowhere to escape. The people inside began coughing violently, as the thick smoke filled the space. Ryan covered his nose as well, and someone anxiously asked whether this plan would really work. He stayed silent with his fists clenched, as the others complained of being smoked to death. Despite the pressure, he continued hoping that the sensors would activate. Moments later, the sensors finally released a stream of water. The sprinklers quickly drenched the area and began extinguishing the flames. After some time, the other students reported that the fire had finally been put out. Meanwhile, inside, Peter ordered Wang to begin calculating the losses. Wang then led several students to inspect, while Ryan quietly looked around on his own. As Ryan walked through the area, he suddenly noticed something on the floor. So he squatted down to examine the bottles more closely. After studying it carefully for a while, he finally stood up again. Nearby, Danny looked around and saw that much of the food had been destroyed. Tony panicked hearing this, and wondered how a fire could have started so suddenly. However, Ryan interrupted him, and stated that the fire had clearly been set intentionally. More specifically, he revealed that the person responsible was someone among them, Upon hearing this, Tony was confused since burning their own food made no sense. Yet the others still began questioning who was responsible. Ryan then pointed out that the culprit had already exposed a slip. He stepped inside and pointed bottles of Florida water that certainly had caused it. He explained that the culprit had lit the Florida water to start the fire, then immediately fled back to the hotel and mixed with the crowd that came to put it out. Before he could continue, Tony declared that anyone smelling of Florida water was the culprit. However, Ryan squatted down and pointed out that there was another thing. He picked up the remains of the bottles and said it was a pity, since Florida water evaporates quickly in heat, and its scent would already be gone. However, there was still another clue he knew. Before he could finish speaking, Danny suddenly exclaimed. He said that he had just remembered something. With that, he pointed at the guy who had bullied him earlier and declared that it was him. He explained that earlier he had smelled a strong scent of Florida water on him. The guy shouted back by accusing Danny of slander and targeting him. But he was grabbed by someone who said he looked like he needed a spanking. He turned and saw that it was Peter, who said that he had smelled it as well. Hearing this, the guy became furious with him. But seeing that everyone was already wary of him, he tried to escape and ordered Peter to get out of his way. Seeing this, Wang hurriedly ran after him. Wang was much faster, and he quickly grabbed the guy by his shirt. Then he forced him to the ground. Watching this, the other students were amazed that he managed to catch him so quickly. They then surrounded the culprit, whispering about his possible motive. Ryan suggested the guy was angry about what had happened that afternoon. Upon hearing this reason, Peter muttered that it was truly ugly. However, the guy retorted that it was Ryan who had bad intentions. He then challenged Ryan, asking if he really thought he was unaware of his secret plans. The students turned to Ryan, whispering that he and Sheena indeed found the fire first. They looked at Sheena too, wondering why she and Ryan were there so late. Sheena began to tighten her hands, as she heard them call it strange. Suddenly, the guy shouted that he had seen Ryan's bag on the counter when he arrived, so he speculated that Ryan must have been planning to take back something valuable. Upon hearing this, Tony and the others began looking at Ryan suspiciously. Tony himself even decided to fetch the bag. But when he finally unzipped it, he only found snacks, an envelope, and a flashlight. The people were surprised and confused by what they saw. However, Sheena's expression was different from theirs seeing this. Soon, others began asking Ryan what he was planning with these items. At the same time, Sheena looked at him, already guessing his true plan. Ryan was unable to evade the questioning stares of the others. Suddenly, they were interrupted by a loud laugh and turned toward the source. They saw the guy who'd been caught earlier laughing as he claimed Ryan was up to no good. However, he was pressed down by Wang, who ordered him to behave. Following that, Peter called out to Ryan and urged him to explain himself. Everyone's eyes turned back to Ryan, who remained silent. Faye, who was standing beside him, could not hide her concern and muttered his name. Ryan then finally accepted the situation and declared that he was leaving. Upon hearing this, Faye was clearly shocked that he really planned to leave. After a brief moment of silence, Peter said to Ryan that everyone also wanted to leave, but problems could be solved together. However, he replied that it was not necessary. He picked up his bag and said that he would deal with it on his own. Yet before he could leave, someone stepped forward and stopped him. Shen appeared and said that he could not simply leave as he wished. After all, they had just lost many supplies, and now he was trying to take some of the few left. But he simply walked past her, which clearly infuriated her. She immediately began saying that she had thought he was suspicious for a long time, since something serious had just happened, yet he stayed calm as if it didn't concern him. Tony was shocked upon hearing this, and the people behind him also fell silent. However, Faye scolded Shen and said that if not for Ryan, they'd still be trapped in the fog. Danny also agreed, saying without Ryan's clue, the culprit would have escaped. Yet Shen retorted that Faye and Danny are Ryan's bootlickers, so they were no better. Before she could continue, Peter immediately ordered her to stop. She looked at him furiously after being interrupted, but Peter only stared back at her with a threatening gaze. In the end, she had no choice but to remain silent. Peter then turned to Ryan and said that it seemed he had already made up his mind. Ryan replied that he had never planned anything else from the start. Hearing this, Shen pointed out again that it seemed he already knew what would happen. Peter sighed and finally chose to compromise listening to this. He said they needed someone to investigate the area, and that he respected Ryan's choice to stay or leave. However, he warned that no one should undermine the group's interests like the captured man had. He added that he understood their differing views and had already spoken with Ryan, yet Ryan did not respond and only stared at him silently. Regardless, Peter firmly declared that he would not tolerate such behavior again. The other students soon began discussing among themselves. Suddenly, they heard someone shout from behind that she would leave with Ryan. When they turned to look, they saw that it was none other than Faye. Faye continued to emphasize that she would leave with Ryan, since she believed it was too dangerous for him to go alone. And if she went with him, at least they could take care of each other. Hearing this, Sheena was clearly surprised, and looked at Faye anxiously. At the same time, she began thinking about her own feelings, so she gathered the courage to say that she also wanted to go. However, Ryan said he didn't know what awaited outside, and couldn't promise their safety. Because of that, he suggested that they stay with the others instead. Sheena tried to argue after hearing this, but found herself unable to form the right words. Shen immediately seized the moment, and commented that Sheena was simply a coward, but Faye responded that there was no reason for Ryan to persuade her. She then turned to Shen and firmly said that once she decided, she never changed her mind. Seeing that Faye was really preparing to leave, Danny began to feel nervous. He believed only Ryan could protect him, and feared bullying if he stayed behind, but he had no intention of experiencing that once more, so he raised his hand, and said that he also wanted to go with Ryan. The students quickly mocked him, and said it was fine for him to leave since he ate too much. With that, Ryan's group now consisted of 4 people, while Peter just watched the scene silently. After a moment, he calmly asked if anyone else wanted to leave. Someone quickly raised his hand, and said that he would go as well. Yet he added one condition where anyone leaving should take enough food and water for at least 2 days. The other students immediately became furious upon hearing this, but their protests were interrupted when he explained his reasoning. He said that, if they managed to find more resources outside, they would return and inform the group. After hearing this, Peter quickly agreed to the condition. Suddenly, Sarah arrived asking if everyone was okay and how the fire started. She even began checking them to see if anyone had been hurt. So, Peter reassured her that everything was under control, and said he would explain the situation to her. Meanwhile, students whispered that she was unreliable, since she hadn't heard despite the hotel's noise. After a while, Sarah was told what happened and asked Ryan if he was certain about leaving. Ryan simply nodded and admitted that she also did not know what to do, but she felt that the situation was becoming increasingly unsettling. He then said it was better to have a leader than to be scattered. Still, she's worried since they'd just settled down, and he was heading into the unknown. After thinking for a moment, she said that she could go with them as well. However, he reminded her that the students who stayed needed her more, so she could only sigh as he said they'd leave in the morning. The following day, Ryan's group was already packed and waiting outside. Peter came to see them off and wished them luck with their investigation. Ryan responded with a brief farewell before the group began walking away. Shen and Peter quietly watched them leave. Shen eventually asked Peter whether he believed this plan would really work. Before Peter could respond, Wang called out to him. He asked how they were going to deal with their troublesome classmate. Peter immediately turned around upon hearing this, causing the captured boy to flinch. However, Peter simply smiled, and ordered them to give the boy fire since he liked it so much. Meanwhile, Ryan's companions began asking where they were going. Ryan replied that they were heading toward the eastern part of the city. However, Faye had already noticed that the others were sweating from exhaustion, so she suggested that they take a rest, since they had been walking for so long. Ryan then checked his phone, and was surprised they'd been walking for 3 hours. With that, he finally agreed that they should sit down and rest for a while. Once they were seated, Faye rummaged through her bag asking Sheena if she was hungry. Just as she urged her to eat something, someone approached them. The white-haired girl named Chi-Chi politely asked if she could sit with them. When Faye realized it was their captain, she immediately agreed. However, Chi-Chi urged her to just use her name since they weren't training, but Faye refused. Setting that aside, she urged that nervous Sheena to talk to Chi-Chi, which only embarrassed her more. Unbeknownst to them, someone nearby quietly took a photo of the group. The person carefully captured Faye's refreshing look, Sheena's delicate and charming face, and Chi-Chi's nearly perfect figure. After snapping several photos, he could not help but exclaim that the trip had been worth it. Danny noticed Jin and asked if he really had time to take pictures. Jin replied the setting made for better portraits, and that he'd post them on his blog later. He even had already begun imagining the reactions and comments from his fans. Seeing his expression, Danny called him a pervert, but he took it as a compliment. Meanwhile, Ryan quietly took a sip from his drink. When he set the bottle down on the table, he noticed some decayed food nearby. Just then, someone appeared behind him, and asked what he was doing. The person named Zane then noted Ryan was watching the decaying food on the table. In response, Ryan asked him what he thought about it. Zane set down his bag, saying he'd been secretly experimenting since their monitor's incident. He also rummaged through his bag, saying time's inconsistency made reliable results impossible. Ryan, on the other hand, remained silent as he listened. After that, Zane told him that he had managed to discover something about the mist. He then pulled out a small device and showed it to him. Ryan quickly recognized it as a portable air detector, prompting Zane to praise his knowledge. He He then explained, smog is excess particulate matter, usually PM2.5, but the city's fog had a different cause. Ryan confirmed that the PM2.5 index had remained normal the entire time, so he looked at Zane and asked what he was trying to imply. Zane put the detector away, saying that with proper instruments at his uncle's institute, he could analyze the fog. Hearing this, Ryan asked if that was why he had joined them. Zane admitted it was, then asked why Ryan wanted to head east. Ryan simply replied that there was something he needed to confirm. Meanwhile, in the real world, Liam sat casually in his chair when Tao suddenly arrived. She then saw he was reading a report on vanished supermarket goods and the fire that followed. Liam also heard her heels approaching and asked how things were, which she said there's nothing new, as there had been no progress regarding Ryan's mother. He then peeled a banana and said there was no need to worry since they still had plenty of time. Still, she said that without the door they couldn't know that world. He quickly replied that once the fear faded, motivated subjects would start acting. He also believed it wasn't hard to guess their actions from the clues left behind. Even so, she asked if he wasn't worried they might move faster than expected. He replied that when time itself loses its standard, fast and slow lose meaning. Just as he finished speaking, he heard a loud buzzing sound. Confused by this, he quickly picked up his phone and asked the person on the other end what had happened. After he confirmed the situation, Tao asked if the call came from their organization and what had happened. However, he simply stood up and walked past her, which left her confused. As he moved toward the door, he casually remarked that something had finally appeared. Specifically, it was a new corpse. Meanwhile, in the other world, Danny and the others reached a slum that unsettled him. Ryan then explained they had no choice since it was the closest route, and by their plan, they'd pass supermarkets or convenience stores along the way. So food wasn't a problem, but he was worried about something else. The group continued walking through the area, while Jin remained busy taking photos. At one point, he suddenly saw someone pass by the alley nearby. The figure looked familiar, and Jin heard the person saying something about becoming popular. Shocked by what he saw, he immediately turned toward the alley, asking who was there. A classmate noticed his reaction and asked why, so he said he'd just seen someone nearby. However, the others didn't believe him, and thought he was imagining it, yet he remained certain of what he had seen, and believed that he recognized the person. So he told them that he would go check it out and catch up with them later. The two classmates then left, while muttering that Jin was becoming paranoid. Afterward, Jin continued forward with his camera in hand. As he walked deeper into the eerie alley, he noticed that the surrounding fog was becoming thicker and thicker. So he swallowed nervously, and finally stopped walking. Then he raised his hand toward the mist, wondering if it was truly dangerous. But after he put his finger into the fog, he was unharmed, so he wondered if he was just overthinking. However, a strange smell suddenly reached his nose. He quickly looked down at the ground to check what it was, and he was shocked to see that it was blood. He continued examining the area, and noticed that the blood also stained the nearby walls. Yet he couldn't understand why blood appeared when only their group was around. He then decided to look around more, but what he saw next on the ground filled him with horror. Lying there was another camera just like his, and it was completely stained with blood. Despite his fear, he slowly approaches the camera lying on the ground, but a loud curse echoed nearby and startled him. He then immediately wondered if someone else was there. Yet remembering how strange this place felt, he quickly decided to find a hiding spot first. He turned around and searched for somewhere to conceal himself. The shouting of people continued somewhere close by, and the sound of something crashing echoed through the alley. Jin quietly crouched beside a stack of boxes, while listening to the distant screams. However, his body trembled uncontrollably with fear. Suddenly, he noticed someone walking nearby. Panic filled him as he worried that the person might head in his direction. But the footsteps were already approaching, leaving him with no chance to move, so he could only remain where he was, and grit his teeth in fear. Moments later, the footsteps passed by him, but he had kept his head lowered the entire time. When he finally dared to look up, it was already empty. Only then did he realize that whoever it was had already left. At that moment, his camera lit up, and he realized he'd accidentally pressed the shutter. He then looked at the photo that had just been taken, but what he saw left him stunned. The picture showed two of his classmates running away in panic. Confusion filled him as he wondered how they could have appeared there. Suddenly, he remembered the camera he had seen earlier on the ground. With that thought in mind, he cautiously moved forward into the alley. After spotting the camera again, he quickly picked it up and nervously checked its contents. What he saw next horrified him, since the camera held the exact same photo he had just taken. Meanwhile, Ryan checked his map and told the others there was a store ahead. Upon learning this, the student Luke began cursing Peter for giving them poor supplies. However, Faye asked him where Jin was, since he'd been walking right behind them. Another student replied that Jin had heard something and went to check it out. Ryan then warned it wasn't safe in the fog, and asked why Jin went alone. The student tried to defend himself, saying that it was not his fault, but Luke said they'd find Jin first, and let the others wait at the store. With that, he urged the student to come with him. Watching them leave, Sheena could not help but ask Ryan whether they would be alright. Ryan replied that he still had not fully understood how the fog worked. Just before he could finish speaking, they heard a loud scream suddenly echo in the distance. Moments later, they saw Luke and the other student running back toward them in terror.